Welcome to Healing the Tigress, a podcast of stories and conversations on Asian American Pacific Islander maternal mental health. We are your hosts, Peggy, a licensed clinical social worker,
and Jasmine, a clinical pharmacist. Both of us are Taiwanese American mothers and survivors of postpartum depression and anxiety.
We don't know about you, but we didn't grow up talking much about mental health in our families, and we want to change that now that we are mothers.
Together, with our clinical backgrounds and passion on the subject, we want to create a safe space for the AAPI community to discuss perinatal mental health issues.
And together, we want to break generational cycles in our own parenting journeys so that we can heal our inner tigress, a nod to the tiger moms before us. We're so happy you're tuning in here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Today, we are very excited to have a special guest recording with us. She has so much insight and wisdom and experience to share in her mental health journey. And I really think she was actually the inspiration for me realizing that AAPI mothers needed more representation in the maternal mental health space when I first discovered her writing over a year ago. So please help me welcome Leah Kim, who was Nike's global yoga ambassador for 10 years. She's a mother of two, a blogger, and a podcast host herself for Voices on the Side. And she's a fantastic writer whose words just moved me enough that I had to reach out to her. So I'm so excited that we're going to connect with her today. And Leah, if I can sing so much of your praises. I would love if you could just tell us more about yourself, your background, and how your mental health was rocked when you became a mother.
Thank you so much for that overly kind and generous introduction.
I love you. You know that.
Oh my God. No, I love you too. And I'm so happy to meet you too, Peggy. This is so wonderful that we are having these conversations, not just like when we started just DMing, right? And just having our conversation individually, but then uplifting it and like bringing it more and more into the public eye, I think is so important. So I'm so glad that you guys are doing this and that I get to be a part of it. So thank you. Yeah, I think for me, because mental health was not something that was unfamiliar to me, I thought I was going to have a good handle on it. Like I grew up with a mentally ill mother who struggled a lot with things that I actually didn't really know, because being a Korean family, we didn't talk about like specifically. But, we all knew she wasn't well. I saw various medications that she took, and then I would go and look up in like literal paperback encyclopedias at the time, like what is this whatever medicine that I was finding in like the orange bottles. And I would look it up because this is pre-internet, and I'd be like, okay, this is for depression. Okay. And just fill in the blanks in that way. And it was scary because you don't, as a child, want anything to be wrong with anyone in your family. But it was also like, because it existed in literature, in like the encyclopedia, and once I found like pamphlets on depression, I felt like it was being cared for. Like, oh, there's stuff written about it. It's obviously something that's happening, to many people. There's medication made for it. So it was kind of like, oh, this is scary, but also there's doctors that are figuring it out. I sort of had that mentality. And then I mean, so much repression happening as a child, which is all a child can really do, unless they're being supported very directly with their own therapy, or if they happen to be born into a family that's very literate in talking about emotional health, mental health, which is, I think we're seeing more now. I hope we as mothers are creating that kind of space for our children now. But, for us, our generation, and particularly being of Asian background and immigrant backgrounds, that it just wasn't happening. But so I think the best a child can do is cope, right? You figure out. And that's what I did. I coped by being like really friendly, really talkative, really good at school, really busy at school, just focusing on all that. And then like eventually, going through college and eventually becoming a yoga teacher. And yoga very specifically addresses the connection between the mind and the body, right? So we are using a bodily physical practice to access the mind and our emotions and our soul, going through all the different sort of deeper levels of who we are. And one way of looking at that is I can control how I feel mentally, emotionally through my body, through this physical practice of yoga and meditation, which meditation it is a physical practice. Like you're accessing the mind, but you're doing something physically to do that, right? And so I was like, this is perfect. I have the answers, all the tools to just be well, to be physically well, to be mentally well. And, so, and it wasn't like thinking about all this in that much detail when I decided to become a yoga teacher or even started doing yoga. It just, along the way, the more I learned, it was just like all these bonuses to being in good physical shape was like, oh, well, I'm not going to be stressed and I'm not going to be anxious and I'm not going to be depressed. And for a very long time that worked. That was like, I just felt genuinely happy and strong. My mom continued to have just like a lot of ups and downs and it was scary, but I was like, oh, well, I'm just really strong. I know how to handle this. It's all good. And then I had my first child, which
And this was like 9 years ago.
yes,
So I'm just trying to set
9
the
years
stage.
ago.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Okay.
2014, he was born. And you can't prepare. You just can't, I mean, you can prepare,
No.
but there's no guarantee that however you prepared yourself, whether it was like for the birth, for labor, whatever, or what kind of feeding you're going to have or how they're going to sleep, there's like you cannot control that, right? You can inform yourself all you want, but like a lot of the stuff that I read ultimately was irrelevant to like my particular child. And a lot of stuff I was like, what is this? Like I was not prepared for this.
But like, even though your mom had history and you've kind of grown up with it all your life, it still didn't seem to prepare you for what you
No,
went through.
because I was like, I'm this yoga person. And I wasn't even just like a person that did yoga. I was like,
Mhm.
yoga was my life. Like Nike, one of the largest corporations globally, had hired me because of my expertise, like I was, and it's not that I believed ever that I knew and everything about it. I did take my job, my work very seriously, like there was even this like UC Irvine yoga studies certificate, like like an extension program type thing where I literally went to college and got my like yoga studies certificate. This is like back in 2002 or 3. And like I learned as much as I could, right? And I also had I felt the pressure of I have to have all the answers. Like there was no room for me to even consider that it wouldn't be perfect, that the birth wouldn't be perfect. Number one, I was booked to give birth in in like a pool, like my birth plan was like no interventions, no medication, nothing. I was just like, there's no option of it going otherwise, which it did. It went completely otherwise.
Oh,
It
wow.
ended in an emergency C-section after 3 days of
Wow.
labor. It was just like,
Were you 3 days laboring in the water and then they sent you to the hospital?
I
Or
couldn't even go into the pool because my water broke. Actually, on the due date, it broke, and I was like, "Great, it's perfect. See, perfect. Everything's gonna be perfect." But once your water and all they confirmed like all the waters were gone, like you can't go into water at that point. Like it's because it's not safe for the baby. Once your water breaks, your baby has to get out within 24 hours because, right? Like it's infection, right? But I was in the UK, and there it's really strange, but they sent me home because my contractions hadn't started yet. So they were like, "Well, okay, your water broke, but like your contractions will probably start soon. Go home and come back when they start." And like they didn't start. Like I never got contractions actually. By the second day, they had to put me on Pitocin. And once sometimes you can have certain levels of intervention and then it can go well. But like just for me, everything went wrong. And when I zoom out and look back on like a deeper, let's say spiritual level, I see that there was like this major lesson for me to learn, through that. And maybe that's just a way of my like translating what happened for something positive, but it makes sense to me now. I was grasping so firmly to like, I need to have a natural quote unquote birth because I needed to have that. I felt I needed to have that story for afterwards, like to be able to tell everyone like, hey, this Nike yoga ambassador that I am, like I had this really easy water birth, like yay me. And this means that all my yoga practice has worked. So there was that part of
The
it.
pressure to keep that image of I'm a mindful person. I'm going to have a mindful birth. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I read all these books that like tell you, like, just think positive and you will manifest the birth you want. Like that's what I was reading, and like I believed it. And I was like, and the other piece was you asked Jasmine about like, well, I knew about my mother's mental health history, or as much as I could have known, just sort of trying to fill in the blanks on my own. But again, I thought I had that sorted because I worked so hard to protect my own mental health. And, I just was like, I think also I was too scared to to have any space for, oh my God, I might end up having to deal with what she dealt with. So that way, just the same as like, I never thought the word C-section when I was pregnant. I really didn't, because I was like, don't plant that seed in my psyche and it won't happen, which is so ridiculous because I wish I had informed myself on all the possibilities. And then I would have been able to have more of a sense of control when the circumstances came up that did, rather than just being completely just like feeling like I was just smacked upside the head with what happened, because all I thought about was water birth, natural birth, Same thing with like when it came to postpartum depression. It was like, just don't think about the term and it won't happen.
Your parents are Korean immigrants, right? And you grew up sort of with that understanding that there was something not well with your mom mentally. And did she ever really talk about that with you? Or was it more you really did all that background yourself? So you thought you had a grasp on maybe what that was, but she never actually talked to you about it, because a lot of our Asian parents won't, right?
Never talked about it when I was a child, like still living at home. When I got a little bit older, she would send me messages, like text messages saying like, oh, she didn't feel good. Like she felt really worried. She felt really anxious. She felt like she couldn't breathe. So here I am, like living, once I turned 18 and went to college, I never moved back. I actually have moved kind of further and further away from where I grew up in the Bay Area. I, went to school in LA, and then I moved to Hong Kong. And it was in Hong Kong, I remember I'd get these messages and I was like, I don't know how to help my mom, and it was just like very worrying, but I didn't know what to make of it. Also, I was like, okay, she feels anxious. And I would respond I didn't know how you're supposed to respond to that. So I would just try to placate her. Like, it's fine. You're fine. What do you have to worry about? You're safe. You've got food. What like
it's almost that same mentality of like, just think the positive. Like, don't think about that. Yeah,
totally. And like in hindsight, I remember like, so after my son was born and, I felt just so disconnected from everything, like from who I thought I was, who I currently was, from my own family, like from, my husband and my child. I started to remember, like I started to recognize the way I felt was like those times that I witnessed my mom when I was younger and in like having some sort of breakdown or whatever. And like when I was a little bit older, those conversations where I'm like trying to help, but I'm saying things like, hey, this one like really haunts me, but I like saying like, you're so lucky. You should be grateful. Like there's children starving in Africa. Like, what do you have to be sad about? And really not trying to really trying to help, not trying to shame her, but I just didn't know. And finally I
And
knew.
you are her child too. I think that's the other thing too, is like, it really isn't on you to do that for her.
Oh my God.
So that also puts you in an interesting place.
Of course. So like I become a mom. It's hard, right? The depression is there, anxiety is there, everything is there. And I'm like processing, oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm like, I'm feeling so bad for my mom. And I'm like, if this is how she felt for the bulk of my life, which is what I remember, it was just always been hard for her. I'm like so sad that this is what she has dealt with. And then I'm seeing through the lens of being a mom. And it wasn't this kind of realization came later as my son got older, but I'm like, wait, but this isn't his problem. I can't expect my child to fix me or take care of me. And it was just like this, like trying to hold, like the compassion for my mother, but the compassion for the little me, and then like the compassion for myself. And, just like everything, it's like holding so much. And I think that's why this concept of, oh, okay, postpartum depression, it happens to X percentage of moms, and it usually resolves within X period of time. Like I feel like most of the information I have read about it says like it's like a year period, right? And I really hope that is true for the majority of people. But how can someone's mental health be boxed into a specific time frame?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, and it's like it's a spectrum, right? It's there's no finish line. There's no like, oh, I'm good now. Cool, I'm done. And that's the
Healing's not linear, and
Yeah.
there's no timeline on it.
And I've known people who develop postpartum depression after the
Yeah.
first year. Like they didn't have it that first year and they develop it after. It doesn't have to be in that box.
How long was yours, Leah, if you don't mind us?
I always say that it was when my son was 3 that I started having moments of like feeling like myself again. Like I do have a clear cut picture moment. I was in Soho in New York going to like a Pilates class, and I swear like I felt like the colors of the buildings and the sky and the trees, I felt like I could actually see them. It almost felt like, oh, my contacts just like position themselves correctly and I can see clearly again. But it wasn't like, oh, from that moment, everything was fine. That moment was the first one where I was like, oh my God, I'm still here. Oh. And then I would say like by the time he was 4 is when I didn't have any. So for me, the symptoms that took me to therapy that I was like, oh my God, I can't manage this on my own were panic attacks. So like, the anxiety and depression is such a broad term. I feel like we have to be so much more specific when we talk about it. But like for me, nobody would have seen me and said that I looked depressed. Because I also went back to teaching when he was 4 months old. I went back to my work with Nike. I was traveling worldwide. I was still doing all that stuff. And I look back at photos of various events. I'm like, it's confusing because I look pretty happy, like I look the same. And but it definitely wasn't, it was So,
And was medication ever on the table, or you felt like you wanted to try it, or, you know?
no. So, I mean, I was open to it. So that's what I was saying. I think I didn't even know I was depressed. And maybe it didn't start till he was like a year, like I know I didn't feel great because my husband and I were arguing quite a lot because he was just seeing this person that he didn't recognize and that was angry and just like for me the symptoms initially were like I was just so like uptight and mad and you know but I felt like I had a handle on it because if we were in front of family or friends I could just put on my mask again. And it was only when he was like a little almost 1.5 and then the panic attack started that I could not control, like I couldn't just mask that. And so that's what made me realize like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I need help. And I found my therapist. And at that time, I was open to whatever I might need to support, And I asked him, I'm like, maybe the second or third session, I'm like, do you think I need medication based on what you're hearing? And he said to me, I don't think you do. I think that we can, help you manage these symptoms and keep digging deeper without medication. And for me, that felt really right. And it felt like such a relief because a lot of my mother's illness got really messy with her medication. I mean, she would have like 5 different things happening at once. And then as I learned about it, I'm like, wait, you're not supposed to be on this antidepressant for that long. Like and I don't know. I mean, you obviously know much more about it, but like, I was like, she's been on the same antidepressant for like 10 years. And I don't even know if that's true because they never talked to me. It's just what I could.
You're piecing together as a child, or just like what you can put
Right.
together.
Yeah. But I mean, I know that there's certain ones that have always been around that she's taking. And it was like a cocktail. It was like a mixture of Zoloft, Ambien, Xanax, and like, like all this stuff happening. And I was just like, it's
Jasmine's pharmacist gears are spinning. All the polypharmacy too.
I'm like, well, I'm thinking about it. I can understand, like, maybe why she's using certain ones, right? But I think what you're saying, and I don't want to like make listeners feel like if I have to take an antidepressant forever, that this is a bad thing. But I think if you're saying that your mom was on all these medications, but she was still unwell, like nothing was improving, right? I think that's when you start to question, like, is this actually the right cocktail? Is this the right combination? Do we need to peel back? Do we need to change it? Do we need to change the dose, right? So I don't want people to feel scared of taking medication because that obviously saved my life. But like, you need to also go into it with the approach that medication is not the cure-all, right? You're not going to take a pill and magically be better. You need to also be conscious of, is this working in my favor? And what else do you have to add it on with? So therapy is very important. I think you cannot recover without the therapy. That's the baseline you have to have. So I'm glad that you were able to, work through it the way you did, because part of it sometimes is digging deep and uncovering the traumas, repairing that. And sometimes that can help you. Other times you need the medication to help you see better, to help you focus. Right.
I completely agree. And I think I do wonder, had I been more like maybe been less traumatized when it came to medication, and had I gone that route, maybe it would have resolved sooner, I don't know. And I am not opposed to it at all. It was like so terrifying. Like the thought of having to take medication took me into panic. So with my therapist, it was just like, well, we're going to try this. And I 100% feel that if there was no improvement, we would have gone that way. And I actually did have to take an anti-anxiety once to get through a dental surgery because I just couldn't do it. And that even like took multiple therapy sessions to work through because just taking, I mean, I'm super weird about it. Like I had this hacking cough like a month ago, and finally went to a doctor and they prescribed me like steroids, probably. I think it's two different things.
Probably antibiotics and steroids.
I didn't take it. I went and because I was like, I'm going to give it one more night sleeping over a humidifier and like, because it was kind of getting better. And I think I just wanted to rule out maybe like, I just wanted them to like listen to my lungs or something. And they were just like, oh, this is just a residual dry cough, something. And I paid for the medicine, which wasn't cheap, actually. It was like, I don't know. It was just, for whatever reason, it was kind of expensive. And then I just didn't take it because I fully recognize that this is like a trauma that I have from my mom. And to your point about the therapy, that is something that as I researched medicine, an antidepressant or what's the general term for medicine you take for
psychotropic medications.
That, okay. It was like, it almost always, everything I read always says like, it's not just the medication, it's the medication plus. And therapy is typically what comes up. And my mom never did that. And but I really feel for her and anybody else, especially with her, like how she identifies as like an immigrant and being Asian, and like even for me being American born and trying to navigate like the medical system and insurance and everything, it's very daunting, and it's like, so I can only imagine for her how difficult it was, just that piece, like the logistics piece, but then also like, how are you going to find somebody that you feel like you can speak to if she only had access to English speaking therapists? Like, how are you going to talk about the depths of your like, psychological situation with somebody that doesn't even speak your native language? So I really just feel for her in that regard. That said, even if she were in Korea, based on what I know from my relatives there, I don't think that therapy would have been easy for her to come by there either, So I don't, it's difficult, but I think this goes back to like, there's no one solution, right? And I think what's really beautiful and helpful for me was that to know that like, I wasn't trying to find one answer for how to get better. It sucked in a way because you want a magic pill, right? Like we all do. We want like it just to be quickly better. But when I realized that I wasn't trying to fit myself into like a timeline, a finish line, a certain kind of path, it was just like, okay, this is really about like me figuring it out. And one of my friend's mothers, who's sort of like an adoptive mother to me, said to me, she was listening to one of my episodes or something. She called me right away and she was like, I don't know if you had postpartum depression based on like, maybe the widely accepted definition of it. And I think part of it was because she's like, well, because postpartum depression should be contained in a year. She was like, I think for you, really, it was more like the resurgence of your trauma from childhood happening when you became a mother. It was more PTSD than like a more generic definition of postpartum depression. And I appreciated her perspective. I think it really depends like how you're going to describe postpartum depression. And, like, I think you get really specific about it in your writings. But like, it's like, oh, feeling anxious all the time, that's postpartum depression. Feeling super neurotic and OCD when you become a new mother, also postpartum depression, right? Like it comes out in a lot of different ways.
It's that spectrum you're talking about is, I mean, I think the thing is like postpartum depression is a more recognized label that people can sort of attach to. But then when you get more specific, you could have a bunch of things. You will have several. You could have had PTSD, you could have had depression, you could have had anxiety and OCD, you could have had all of it at once. And then that makes me really feel for you because you had a lot going on.
I had 4 diagnoses. It was postpartum depression, generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, and a few years later, I would find eating disorders all related to that. And it makes sense, like it makes sense because it ties back into childhood trauma. So I think to go back to that earlier question of like the length of it, I think it just really depends. And for me, it was, I sincerely feel this now, but for me, becoming a mom and the horribly difficult period that I had was my way out of the childhood trauma. You know, it was like, it makes me emotional thinking about it, but like,
Yeah.
because without it, I would have gone on like repressing, you know, I would have gone on like,
Yeah.
well, mask, where's my mask today? Right. I'm just going to be strong. I'm so strong. I'm this yoga person that knows so much. And I just couldn't do that anymore. And I think part of it was like, when you're a new mom, especially, you just don't have the energy to, like, you barely have the energy to, wash your hair on a regular basis, let alone like, you know, just like fake, like work really hard to like fake being happy or whatever. And I think part of it was just like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. And it felt, I was so resentful at first. Like, it's not fair. I don't get to have this happy experience, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I was like, and I would internalize that as like, I must not deserve it. Why do I not deserve to be those moms that are like look so happy, like walk. I just remember I would see beautiful looking mothers with their baby strapped and holding a coffee and just walking down and looking so happy. And of course, who knows if that's like, I saw like one moment in that mother's life, but I know from friends that most of my friends didn't have anything that they would consider postpartum depression, you know? So it was really difficult to not compare to those people. And then thinking, I must have done something wrong. I must be doing something wrong because that's not happening. And really realizing that that's not true. It's like,
No.
it's not true.
When you became a new mom, this was like, a while back now. And I'm thinking, right now in our day and age, I feel like we're able to talk about the mental health aspect a lot more. But I can imagine even like back then, it was probably even harder. And, just kind of setting the stage of how I found you, right? I was looking for articles, in this forum that had essays submitted from people who had postpartum depression. And I was trying to even find somebody that looked like me because I felt like, wow, there's like nobody here that looks like an Asian American. And when I stumbled upon your piece, it was like, oh, there's one Asian person here. I'm going to read this story. And I was like, oh, when I read it, I was like, yes, like, I can imagine for you, like you wrote that article. I think it first appeared actually on Medium in 2018. And that's over 5 years ago to the day. So, I bet even back then it was even harder to talk about postpartum depression and connecting with someone that looked like you that was talking about it. Do you feel like it was even harder back then?
Completely, totally. Like, I mean, think about it. Instagram started in, I think it was 2011 that it launched. And so I was pregnant 2013, had my son 2014. What it looked like back then, just as a representation of like the community that you could have had and the examples of motherhood that you could be seeing, it was so different to how it is currently, you know? And there was nobody that I felt like that was talking about this. It was mostly, everybody was still very much like, oh, you post your vacation photos online to make your life look perfect. That's really how, I mean, that's how Facebook was when you started, like when we all started using it. It was just like, it was like a brag reel, you know? It was this, it wasn't really a place where anyone talked about anything really deeply or anything that they felt a shame around, or, you know. And in 2018 also, I remember when I started putting that stuff out there, people were like, you're so brave, right? Which indicates that there wasn't something being commonly done. And thank God it's changed since then.
I think the "you're so brave" comments also makes me realize everyone else knows that this is going on behind the closed doors and no one's talking about it. So the one person who does is the brave one, but everyone knows we're all like, everyone else is experiencing
Totally.
it. There's something about calling out that you're being brave that isn't just like, oh, wow, you're going through this. I've never heard of it. It's like, oh, you're brave because we're all hiding this or something.
Well, and I think that's how the social media landscape has evolved to have more brave people out there sharing their stuff because, you know, we encourage each other. And I remember first posting about postpartum depression. And I was like, I posted it and I was like bracing for like, I was like, Nike's going to fire me. Nobody's going to want to take yoga from me anymore because clearly I don't know what I'm doing if I'm depressed, like, you know, and that didn't happen. Like certainly not in like any sort of immediate way. And so then I got more brave, you know, and then you start to find a community like you and I, Jasmine, found each other, like you found me and we stayed connected, which I'm so grateful for. And then it's like you get strength to figure it out and to deal with it. And also though, the deeper you go into this conversation about postpartum depression or mother's mental health generally, the more complex you realize it is. And it's like, I feel like when you talk about it from just like a medical support perspective, they talk about the symptoms, managing the symptoms, healing the symptoms, right? And I think because it's such a terrible thing to go through, I think a lot of mothers, once they get through it, don't really want to look back, right? Yeah. And also I think we don't want to be like negative to our friends or other people who are like pregnant or thinking about having a baby. It's such a disservice, but I understand where it comes from because like, you don't want to be like, oh, good luck, you're probably going to go crazy, right? Like, oh man, like there goes your sense of self. Like, you don't want to say that, but like, it's true. And it's like, because back then for me, when I had my first, like, nobody was having those conversations. I didn't know. And I'm like, I did go back to my best friend had a 1-year-old at the time. And I remember calling her about a month in, and I called her and I was like, why didn't you tell me it was this hard? Why didn't you tell me? You know, I was like almost mad. And she goes, I did. You just can't conceive of it until you're there. And that's like, it's so true, you know, and I'm sure she did try to go like, oh, it's going to be like, whatever, all the things, like it's going to be so exhausting and you're not going to know what you're doing. And because of my mindset prior to giving birth, being so like, I can control everything. And because I had controlled everything up until that point. Anybody could have like looked me in the face and tried to tell me about all the things that I should prepare myself for. And I wouldn't have heard it, it would have been like in one ear, out the other. So I think, but I think it is important to know what can happen and to not be afraid of it. And for us mothers that have gone through, to keep having the conversation from this perspective of like, hey, this is what happened. It was terrible and difficult and scary. And this is what I did to get through. And this is where I am now. But I feel like a lot of people just, because who wants to keep going back and talking about like this terrible period in your life, you know?
Yeah, I know. I get that too.
But I think you're doing something that your mom was unable to do for you, right? Like she never talked to you in depth about what her depression was like, and no fault of her own. She didn't have the tools to do that. The system wasn't supporting her to do that. And so you had to piece those things together. And it's kind of similar to new moms who maybe haven't talked to their friends about it. And then they piece it together later, even if they like, maybe they knew, but they're just like, oh, whatever, they piece it together. And like, to your point, we don't go around scaring new moms like, you're going to have this, but it's similar to your birth story of, if I had just been a little bit more open to, it could go this way, and that's okay. And this is my plan if it goes this way. Okay, if the water birth doesn't work and I have to have emergency C-section, this is my backup birth plan. And same thing with postpartum. This could happen. What are some ways that we can be there for you when that happens to you? What are some resources you can have? Or even if you're in the midst of it, like I think of listeners right now, maybe pregnant ones or new moms that are like, you're right, this is happening. Okay, but what can we do as like a collective group of moms? What can we do to make sure that you can't eliminate, I think, the experiences of postpartum depression, but you can be better prepared for it, and we can better prepare moms for it,
Yeah. And I think it goes back to that idea of the spectrum. Like, I do not know any mother that doesn't feel like their whole sense of identity shifted. Whether it was all 100% good, I don't know anyone who would say that, but like with the mix of the good and the bad, right?
Those are liars, the ones that are saying it's 100%
agree. Exactly.
100%
I only
agree.
see those on social media, nobody I know in real life. So I don't believe it. But like, so even if we're not talking about something as like serious as like a symptomatic depression or something that needs treatment with therapy, medication, a combination, moms all go through something pretty gigantic, transformational, that comes with good and bad. So I feel like this all is related. Like this conversation, your podcast, is not just for somebody who has gone through postpartum depression or is specifically worried about it. It applies to every mother's mental health, and also like things like come up at different times. Like not only can you have postpartum depression settle in at like a year in or whatever, but I think for a lot of mothers, and this is just my kind of personal observation from people that I know, and because I have kids that, so my younger one just turned 3, and my older one's like 9.5. So I feel like I'm in 2 mom camps, age group wise, and with the 9-year-old, I have access to, because some of those moms have older ones, so I feel like I have access to mothers that have like teenagers. And then I have like the younger one, and I'm in this world of newer moms, right? So, and just from like my observation and conversations, like I think that when families have many babies, one after the other, or not even many, like 2, let's say, and they have them really quickly, right? Like 2 under 2, or God forbid, 3 under 3, or 4 under 4, or whatever. I don't know. Like I obviously was never in that camp. I think I don't know what would have happened if I, like even attempted that. I just couldn't mentally, I couldn't handle it. Plenty of mothers do. And I think like you're so busy and you have to compartmentalize to keep your children alive, that I think like they might think that everything is fine and there's no issues, but it's actually that you just haven't spent any time connecting with yourself. And I say this because a lot of these people, when their youngest hits like kindergarten age and they finally have more space, it can then be like, oh my God, what? I don't know what happened to me. I feel really disconnected. I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want to do, and like I just feel like I don't want to call it an identity crisis, but that's like the term coming up right now. But I think that comes for all moms at some point or other. And it doesn't have to be in this like dramatic way of like what happened with me, but like you only know how to recognize that and how to process and move forward from that if you are in the conversation, like having the conversation. And I think because we're so distracted by our children, they need us and we're doing so much, it just gets pushed to the side. And in a way, those of us that had no choice but to seek help, it's like that's kind of lucky, like, because you're like, it sucks and it's hard, but at least you're being forced to look at it rather than be in denial.
That's a good way of putting it, because you're forced to be more self-aware, and going forward, you have to do certain things to keep yourself afloat as well as your family. And I think we've talked about this before on your podcast when I interviewed with you, that whole thing about how it is important to keep having these conversations even if it's years behind you, right? I'm 4.5 years out, but at the same time, it's still, parts of it's still very raw, can still feel very vivid, and those things are probably never going to leave me. But also to provide people going through it, not to scare them, but also if you are going through it, a sense of hope, maybe, that you can come out on the other side. And what does that look like, right? So, because for me, I felt like I lost all hope, that I just felt like my life was over, that it was like going to be doomed to be this sort of like, I'm all sacrificing, I am never going to sleep again, like this sort of doomsday I planted in my head. But to hear somebody talk about it, and also maybe even just someone who looks like me, because it's like, oh, wow, someone in my community is going through this. I'm not the only Asian American failing at being a mom, right? How did all these other tiger moms get through to this point? And what am I? I'm failing at doing
I
this.
think that's a particular thing with like the saving face that's so prevalent in Asian culture, right? Like we're all so competitive, culturally speaking, you know, we're like have to get all like just be the top of everything. And yeah, then to become a mom and you feel like really ashamed that you're like not able to succeed in whatever you think, you know, it should like your motherhood should look like. And then you're like, well, I can't tell anyone. Like I gotta know, you know? And so, and you have to hear stories from people that look like you. You just have to, because there's such a different feeling, a different message that comes through. You may have said this at one point. I feel like a lot of us say this, but it's just like a man describing what it's like to give birth. You know, it's just like you're just kind of like, I don't really care about what you have to say about that because you don't really know. And in a similar way, when it comes to really anything, it could be anything from like exercise to a career path to motherhood and mental health. But like when you hear the stories of people that look like you, there's this like immediate, really deep resonance of like, okay, I can really see myself in that person's experience because we share some sort of like deeper genetic likeness, or I don't, it's like kind of hard to put words to it, but like
representation matters.
Does.
In all, like, you know, you think about it in all these other ways, but even in this place, even in things that don't need to, like, we're not necessarily celebrating, but it's like a collective grief of the difficulties that can happen shifting into motherhood, right? And I think that representation matters. We need to see that we're not the only ones. Like, what's wrong with me if XYZ person, you know, your mom's like, look at this Chinese doctor that you could have married, but look at his wife or whatever. Like all these, the comparison starts young with us. And so we're going to compare. And if we're saying other people that don't look like, that look like me aren't going through the same things I'm going, what's wrong with me? And then it takes away that isolation that we're not doing this alone.
Yeah, totally.
Leah, before we end though, I do want to like introduce our listeners to the fact that, I think you mentioned on your podcast episode with Michelle Lee, and from our personal conversations that you're writing a book. Are you able to share a little bit with us more about that project, or is it too early to discuss?
I'm happy to discuss it, but what I've learned about this process is like the initial seed, you don't know which way it's going to grow, right? Like it's so who knows what it will turn out, but thank you for asking about that. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, parallels to your work and your writing and then what you are both doing with this podcast. But it is a book on maternal mental health, not just an Asian American lens, but a BIPOC lens, you know, a mother of color lens. I feel like we need a different term for BIPOC is, I don't know, but like person of color also feels like you're just, and I know people are saying global majority now, which maybe that's the one that will land, but it feels sort of like a mouthful.
I like
but
that.
Yeah, it's like specifically
mothers of global majority.
Yeah, I mean, it's all just kind of like, but so mothers of color, and it's looking at specific areas that impact a mother's mental health. So it could be like the medical care. You know, how does your medical care look different if you are a person of color? And it just does, you know, and looking into statistics surrounding, you know, maternal mortality rates and how that is different through race, and also like generational trauma. Like that's a huge thing for me because I see my mental health being inextricably linked to my mother's. And in talking to, I have a cousin who lives in Korea. So she's my mother's sister's daughter. And she's also got 2 children. And my cousin also had the same postpartum depression challenges. And she lives in Korea. We were raised by different people in different cultures, but we had really similar symptoms and challenges. And so that just makes me wonder, you know, like, okay, so if I as a child was impacted by my mother and the state of her mental health, which then means my mental health is impacting my children's mental health, which means like we need to break this cycle, right? Like do what we can to break this cycle of blindly passing down stuff. It just made me really interested in that chain, like how it goes back. So I'll randomly like text my cousin things about like, because my grandparents lived in Korea, and I will randomly ask things about, you know, this event or this thing that happened, like totally out of the blue, or I'll just be like, wait, what were the circumstances around like someone's death? And she just like totally random questions, but it's like trying to piece together where trauma could have been planted and how, like what the ripple effect is. So that's like a big part of it. But so the book is, I just got picked up by an agent a couple weeks ago, which is amazing. Thank you. And it's like wild to work with someone who really understands where I'm coming from and believes in the importance of this message, and really needing the quote minority voice in this conversation, going back to like what you've both said about having people that look like you. And that was a hard thing too. Like I love reading, and one of the things that I went to when I was really suffering and struggling were books, and reading postpartum depression memoirs, or even, did you read that book, This Isn't What I Expected?
Yes, I did. I read it after I got postpartum depression too, because I was like, I need answers. Like, what's happening to me? Why?
I loved that book because I was
too.
like, oh, and again, it made me feel safe that there was language around what I was feeling, like kind of how I felt when I looked up my mom's medication. Like, oh, this is not like only a me problem.
I'm very excited for what your project is. So thank you for sharing a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
I think then to wrap us up for the day, we usually like to just quickly go around and say something real quick about what we want to do to honor our mental health this week. Okay, I can start with one. Sometimes to give myself a mental break, if it feels like the day has been just too exhausting, I'll just order takeout for dinner and not give myself pressure to cook. Because this past week, I had a doctor's visit, and then afterwards, I wasn't feeling very good. So when I picked up my daughter, I said, you know what? I had these plans to cook this tonight for you, but I'm sorry. We're gonna go to our favorite Chinese restaurant and get your favorite takeout order. And she's like, oh, okay. And you know what? I just wanted to curl up in a ball when I got home. So I'm really glad I gave myself some space to, even though I already had a plan, like I didn't go with it. I pivoted, right? So that's mine for the week. Just kind of be more mindful of, it's okay to not always carry through with your entire plan, and listen to my body first. Yeah,
listen to your body. I thought of when I have been more noticing how social media can trigger a lot of my own mental health, like my own anxiety or comparison and stuff like that. So it's so funny because earlier this day I went and like deactivated my Instagram for a hot second. And I was like, why are you being dramatic? Like, you don't have to be that dramatic. And so, which is fine. Some people have to do it because it's the only way to have self-control about checking, social media. So I reactivated it because like, okay, don't be this person. Like, don't be like this right now. So then I have to just be more disciplined and not doom scrolling or be stuck like sitting there watching. So I think I really want to do that and really set boundaries about my social media usage, because it's hard. It's hard to not compare. It's hard not to get stuck in a space where you're just like looking at people's highlight reels, like you had mentioned before, right? Like, especially if you're just in a space where you want to take care of yourself. And
the news has been hard lately, I think, too. So
I think that's hard too. It's just like, I need to like just turn things off, which
a
I know
bit.
is a privilege. Yeah, and it's a privilege to be able to disconnect when things are so chaotic. But yeah, I think give myself some breathing room from social media.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same. Like on Friday evening, as I was putting my daughter to bed and reading her stories, I felt that familiar creep of like anxiety. I felt like there was a rhinoceros on my chest, and I was like, like, what's happening? And like, I don't now, because I recognize those symptoms. It doesn't make me panic. I don't like it, but it it makes me realize that there's something happening outside of my immediate consciousness that is too much for me. And I put it, but like as moms do, we just like put that aside, like got her down. And as soon as I came out, I started cooking dinner and I just started bawling. And it was the news, as you mentioned, and it was all the social media consumption. And I'm also like, because I'm like not trusting the mainstream news, so I'm like trying to be really responsible and discerning with the social media, like activists and journalists that I'm like trusting more, and I'm feeling all this, and I'm like, it's too much. It's just too much, and I feel like you said about the privilege. I have the privilege to disconnect. So that makes me feel really guilty. Like I better not disconnect because there's people in the world that, don't have that luxury of like, my problem is social media. Like it seems so dumb. But like, I was like, no, it's not dumb because it's literally manifesting in my body as like, this is too much. And yeah. And instead just, I think I go back to this and it seems like such a dumb solution or whatever, but like watching something silly, listening to something silly, that whole thing. And so and this is not necessarily specific to this week, but it's just ongoing that I just try to go to like whatever is going to bring that levity into my life. And I think it's like, it really helps for me with mental health.
Yeah. Humans weren't meant to take in the news of the entire world all at once, right? We're really just around what's in our immediate neighborhoods. And I think there's pluses and minuses to it, right? Like we can be compassionate, but there's compassion fatigue, and it can get really difficult. So yeah, I like that levity piece.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah.
Thank you guys all for sharing that. And thanks you, Leah, again for being on with us. I know we could talk forever, so I know we've maneuvered a lot to get this to work today. So thank you for juggling. And it's just how motherhood is, right? We're doing this on our own time. So
yeah,
have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks so much. And I'm so happy you guys are doing this podcast. It's amazing.
We hope you have enjoyed Healing the Tigress and our conversations on maternal mental health in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Please follow our show and our Instagram page to catch our latest episodes. We have so many fantastic guests and deep topics that we are so excited to cover soon.
If you enjoyed this episode or would like to support us more, we would love it if you left us a review and shared this podcast with a friend to spread the word. Check out the show notes for more links. Thanks for joining us today, and we hope these conversations will help our AAPI mothers heal their inner tigress and honor their mental health as they deserve to. See you next time.